Prologue, Silver Falls, Oregon, November 1978. There are places in America where time doesn't stop. It simply refuses to move forward. If you leave Highway 26 in Oregon late enough at night, drive north past the last reliable gas station, past the diner where the neon sign flickers but never fully goes dark, there is a moment when the radio gives up on you. Not silence, just white noise. That's when you're close to Silver Falls. On most maps, it's barely a dot, a logging town that never quite recovered. Tucked against the edge of a national forest where the trees grow too close together, as if they're listening. People who live here don't talk about mysteries. They talk about weather, about rain that lasts for weeks, about fog that rolls in so thick it erases the road 10 feet ahead of you. But they will tell you this: if you stay long enough, some nights, Silver Falls doesn't feel like a place. It feels like a pause. On the evening of November 13th, 1978, a man checked into a roadside motel just outside town. The motel was called the Whispering Pine. It had 12 rooms. Room number 12 was at the very end. The man's name was Thomas Miller. He was 43 years old, a middle school history teacher from Portland, divorced. No children. No criminal record. No history of violence. At 6:40 p.m., he signed the guest ledger with steady handwriting. At 7:10 p.m., he ordered breakfast for two. At 8:03 p.m., the motel clerk heard his television turn on the evening news, CBS affiliate out of Eugene. At 11:17 p.m., the light in room 12 went out. That is the last time anyone can say, with certainty, that Thomas Miller was alive. The next morning, the motel's cleaning staff unlocked the door to room 12. Inside, they found a room that made no sense. To place settings on a small laminate table. 2 cups. One empty. One still warm. A cheap Mr. Coffee machine. Half full. Its heating plate still on. The bed had not been slept in. A wristwatch sat on the nightstand, carefully placed, ticking, and on the desk, beneath the yellow light of a humming lamp, lay a single sheet of motel stationery, dated November 14th, 1978. The problem was simple. It was still November 13th. Thomas Miller was gone. No blood. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. The door had been locked from the inside. This story was never officially called unsolved. Police records would later describe it as a probable suicide with insufficient physical evidence. But that conclusion came years later. After the theories, after the rumors, after people began asking questions that no one in Silver Falls liked answering. Because Thomas Miller did not disappear in a vacuum. He disappeared with a past, and that past had a date attached to it. August 12th, 1965. A summer night. A children's camp. An entire lake that, according to one terrified 10-year-old boy, did not reflect the sky. This is not a story about time travel. It is not a story about aliens. And it is not a story about a haunted town. This is a story about memory, about guilt, and about what happens when the mind spends 30 years running from a truth that refuses to stay buried. Tonight, we are going to walk back through that motel room, through the letter, through the lake. Slowly. Because in Silver Falls, nothing disappears all at once. Chapter 1. Silver Falls is not a mystery. Silver Falls, Oregon, was never supposed to last this long. Founded in the early 1900s as a logging outpost, the town lived and died by timber contracts and mill work. When the mills shut down in the late 60s, people didn't leave all at once. They stayed. White did. They hoped something else would replace the sound of saw blades and shift whistles. Nothing ever did. By 1978, Silver Falls was a town where men drank alone and women worked double shifts, where high school graduates left for Portland and never came back, where the forests pressed closer every year, reclaiming empty houses one by one. Disappearances were not unheard of. Not dramatic ones, not the kind you see on the news. Just men who walked into the woods and didn't come back. Cars found abandoned near trailheads. Hunters who slipped, fell, and were never recovered. The police chalked it up to terrain. The locals chalked it up to loneliness. The Whispering Pine Motel sat right where loneliness and terrain met. Built in 1952, it catered to travelers who didn't want to stay in town. Laggers between contracts. Salesmen. Men who didn't ask questions and didn't want to be asked any in return. Room 12 had the best view of the trees. It was also the room with the worst phone reception. When Thomas Miller chose that room, no one noticed. At the time, there was nothing remarkable about him at all. And that, as it turned out, was the most dangerous thing about him. Chapter 1 continued. The Whispering Pine. The Whispering Pine Motel had a reputation. Though no one ever said that word out loud, it was described instead as quiet, or cheap, or convenient if you didn't want to drive all the way into town. The building was a single-story Alshep, faded green paint peeling like old bark. The sign out front had lost its age sometime in the early 70s, so at night it glowed softly as the Whispering Pine. The office smelled of dust, instant coffee, and lemon disinfectant. Behind the counter on November 13th, 1978, sat Eleanor Pike, 58 years old, widow, Silver Falls resident her entire life. She had worked the desk at the motel for nearly 12 years. She had seen men arrive angry, drunk, scared, hopeful, and broken. Thomas Miller didn't fit any of those categories. Later, when police asked her to describe him, she paused for a long time. Finally, she said, "He looked like someone who'd already decided something. Not sad, just finis." Miller arrived alone, driving a dark blue 1974 Ford LTD. Oregon plates. No visible damage to the vehicle. The trunk was closed, the back seat empty. He paid cash. That stood out, not because it was suspicious plenty of people paid cash, but because Thomas Miller counted it twice. Slowly, methodically. As if he was following a ritual rather than making a transaction. Eleanor handed him the key to room 12. He turned it over in his hand, examined the plastic tag, and nodded. Then he asked a question she would later wish she hadn't brushed off. "Does anyone ever hear the lake from here?" Eleanor frowned. "What? Lake?" Miller smiled briefly. Apologetically. "Never mind." Room 12 was plain to the point of discomfort. 2 double beds, a laminate desk bolted to the wall, a lamp that buzzed faintly when turned on, brown curtains that never quite closed all the way. There was a window facing the tree line. If you stood close enough, you could see the forest breathing in the wind. The first hour. At 7:02 p.m., Thomas Miller called the motel office. Eleanor answered on the second ring. "Yes. I'd like to order breakfast," he said. She told him breakfast was continental only. Left outside the door between 6:30 and 7 a.m. "That's fine," Miller replied. "I'll have 2. There was a pause. "For tomorrow?" Eleanor asked. "Yes," he said, "for tomorrow." When she asked if someone else would be joining him, he hesitated. "No," he said carefully, "not exactly." She wrote down 2 breakfasts. Era made doce. She never asked him to clarify. At 8:03 p.m., the television in room 12 turned on. The volume stayed low, not loud enough to follow dialogue, just enough to create the sense of company. Later analysis of broadcast schedules confirmed the program was the local evening news. A story about mill closures, a weather report predicting heavy rain through the night, a brief segment about a missing hiker found alive near Mount Hood. Thomas Miller watched all of it. That detail would matter later. What the room did not contain. When deputies searched room 12 the following morning, they cataloged what was present. They also noted what was missing. There was no suitcase, no overnight bag, no change of clothes, no to, Bruce, no medication. For a man who planned to stay the night, Thomas Miller had brought remarkably little with him, just a leather briefcase. Inside it, police found a manila folder containing newspaper clippings, a spiral-bound notebook, half-filled a road map of Oregon, heavily creased a single photograph. Black and white, the photograph showed 4 boys standing on the shore of a lake. Summer. Bare feet. A wooden dock behind them. On the back, written in blue ink, Silver Lake Camp, August 1965. 3 of the boys were smiling. The 4th was Thomas Miller, 11:17 p.m. This time stump came from the motel's circuit breaker. At 11:17 p.m., the power draw from room 12 dropped sharply. The television shut off. The lamp went dark. The heating unit clicked once and fell silent. There was no surge, no outage. Elsewhere in the motel, just room 12. When Eleanor did her final walk past the rooms at 11:30, she noticed nothing unusual. No sounds, no voices, no movement behind the curtains. She would later say something else bothered her, though she couldn't explain why. It felt like the room was holding its breath. Chapter 2. The morning after, the continental breakfast tray was prepared at 6:15 a.m. 2 cups, 2 wrapped pastries, 2 cartons of milk. Eleanor placed the tray outside room 12 at 6:42 a.m. She knocked, no answer. She knocked again, still nothing. At 7:18 a.m., she unlocked the door. The smell hit her first. Fresh coffee, pine-scented, air freshener, something warm and human, like a room that had been occupied moments ago. The tray from breakfast was already inside. 1 pastry unopened, 1 half-eaten. 2 cups, only 1 with lipstick. Eleanor would later insist on that detail, even after deputies told her it didn't make sense. Sheriff Harold Grady, arrived at 8:04 a.m. He was 52 years old, a Vietnam veteran. He had worked law enforcement in Clackamas County long enough to recognize the difference between chaos and something staged. Room 12 bothered him immediately. The bed covers were smooth. The bathroom was dry. The mirror showed no steam marks. On the desk lay the letter. Grady picked it up with bare hands before thinking better of it. He read it once, then again. Then he checked the date. Tom, if you're reading this, the fog has already reached the porch. Do not look out the window. I know you'll hear the engine of your old Ford, even though the keys are right in front of you. It isn't the car. When they knock, don't ask who's there. Just remember, in 1965, at the lake, you already saw the light. This time, don't run. Just go. See you tomorrow, the one that won't be yours. No signature. Just a thumbprint. Black ink. Clear ridges. Later confirmed to be Thomas Miller's. The problem, as Grady would later tell it, was simple. There was no pen in the room, and no ink anywhere else. Grady stepped back into the hallway and looked at the forest beyond the window. It was foggy now. Not thick, just enough to blur the edges of things. He would think about that fog for the rest of his life. Chapter 3. The letter is not a message. Sheriff Grady read the letter 3 times before he allowed himself to react. The first time, it sounded like nonsense. The second time, it sounded like fear. The third time, it sounded like planning. That was the version that stayed with him. Investigators would later debate whether the letter was written in a motel room or brought there already prepared. The paper was motel stationery, yes, but that meant very little. Guests often took sheets with them. Pens disappeared constantly. Ink, however, did not. The thumbprint was the most unsettling part. It was not smeared, not rushed, not the mark of a trembling hand. It had been placed deliberately, pressed down, lifted cleanly, like a seal. Grady noticed something else that morning, something no one would take seriously until years later. The letter had been folded once, carefully, then unfolded again, as if Thomas Miller had already read it. The first theory, by noon, the working assumption was suicide. It fit the surface facts well enough. A middle-aged man. Divorced. Obsessive tendencies. A note that read like a farewell. Search teams combed the forest behind the motel. Dogs picked up Miller's, scent near the tree line, then lost it abruptly, as if he had stopped moving altogether. Some deputies suggested he doubled back. Others said the rain washed the trail out. No one mentioned the lake. Not yet. Portland, Oregon. 10 months. Earlier, Thomas Miller lived in a narrow townhouse on the east side of Portland. Sparse furniture. Bookshelves packed too tightly. No photographs newer than the early 70s. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. The kind of man who nodded in passing but never stopped to talk. At Jefferson Middle School, where he taught American history, students liked him. Adults didn't know what to make of him. He spoke slowly, chose his words carefully, corrected people when they were wrong, gently but persistently. One colleague recalled an argument during a staff meeting about a field trip. He said, "Facts don't disappear just because we're uncomfortable with them." And then he looked at me like that sentence was about more than history. Miller had begun taking days off, unscheduled, unexplained. When asked, he claimed migraines. The school nurse noted something different. Insomnia. Disorientation. Difficulty tracking time. The notebook. The spiral-bound notebook found in his briefcase would not be reviewed until weeks after his disappearance. By then, most people had stopped caring. It contained no diary entries, no emotional confessions. Just lists, dates, names, room numbers, weather conditions. Repeated, again and again. And one phrase, written in the margins, dozens of times. Memory edits for survival. Chapter 4. August 12, 1965. Silver Lake Camp was 60 miles south of Silver Falls, in 1965. It catered to families who wanted their children far enough away to feel independent, but close enough to retrieve them quickly if something went wrong. Something did. Shortly after midnight, campers reported a strange glow over the water. Purple, pulsing, low to the surface. Counselors would later contradict one another about what they saw. Some claimed nothing at all, but everyone agreed on this. For 7 minutes, every clock in the camp stopped. When time resumed, cabin C was empty. 4 boys gone, no signs of a struggle. No footprints leading away from the lake. Only one witness claimed to have seen anything meaningful. A 10-year-old boy named Thomas Miller. His statement was recorded at 3:12 a.m. The officer's handwriting shook. The lake didn't reflect the sky, the boy said. It opened. Adults would later dismiss this as shock. They never asked, what else? Thomas Miller remembered. Chapter 4 continued. What the reports did not say. The official report from August 13, 1965 was only 6 pages long. That, in itself, was unusual. For missing children, a summer camp, a lake. Cases like that normally filled folders. But Silver Lake Camp was privately owned, and the sheriff's department at the time was understaffed, underfunded, and eager to avoid panic. The report focused on logistics, search grids, water depth estimates, weather conditions. What it did not focus on were inconsistencies. For example, several counselors claimed the boys were asleep at lights out. One counselor insisted she had seen at least 2 of them walking toward the lake shortly before midnight. Another counselor said the boys had been punished earlier that day and restricted to their cabin. None of those statements were reconciled. And then there was the issue of the clocks. Every mechanical clock in the camp, wristwatches, wall clocks, the mess hall timer, had stopped at 12:41 a.m., restarted, and continued working normally afterward. The report labeled this coincidental mechanical failure. No one ever explained how coincidence learned. Synchronization. Thomas Miller, S. Second statement. Thomas was interviewed twice. The first time, immediately after the incident. The second time, 3 days later. The transcripts did not match. In the first interview, Thomas described the light. In the second, he described sound. I heard them calling, he said, but it didn't sound like voices. It sounded like they were far away already. When asked why he hadn't told anyone sooner, he stared at the floor. I thought if I stayed still, he said, it would finish without me. The interviewer noted that Thomas appeared calm. That assessment would later haunt everyone involved. Chapter 5. How memory protects itself. Memory does not record events the way a camera does. It edits. Psychiatrists would later explain that the human brain, when faced with an unbearable truth, does not erase it. It reframes. It wraps it in symbols, turns screams into lights, turns guilt into mystery. Thomas Miller grew up truly believing that something extraordinary had happened at Silver Lake, because the alternative was simpler and far worse. The adult Thomas. By the time Thomas reached his 30s, he was already showing signs of dissociation. Friends described moments where he would drift mid-conversation. Students noticed he avoided certain topics: disappearances, industrial accidents, mining history. He never taught the chapter on post-war infrastructure failures. When asked why, I said it wasn't on to test. Archives. In the late 1970s, Thomas began spending his weekends in county archives, not researching history, cross-referencing it. Mining permits, environmental reports, old zoning maps. He discovered something that no one had connected in 1965. Silver Lake sat above a network of abandoned ventilation shafts, remnants of a short-lived mining operation shut down in the 1940s. Methane pockets, unsealed access points, wooden barriers long since rotted away. Exposure could cause visual hallucinations, auditory distortions, including the sensation of light where none existed. The boys hadn't vanished. They had wandered and fallen. Chapter 6. Why the motel mattered. The Whispering Pine Motel was built less than 2 miles from one of those sealed shafts. Room 12 sat directly above ground that had been declared geologically unstable in a 1951 survey. That survey was never publicized. Thomas Miller found it in the motel's old maintenance records, filed incorrectly, misdated, ignored for decades. He didn't choose room 12 by accident. He chose it because it was closest. The second set of keys. Deputies found Thomas Miller's car keys on the nightstand. They did not find the spare. That spare would be discovered much later, during a follow-up search near Silver Lake, in the dirt at the edge of a collapsed shaft. Chapter 7. The mistake that changed everything. In 1978, Sheriff Grady made a decision he would regret. He did not push for a full geological survey. Budget constraints, political pressure, a case that already felt resolved. Thomas Miller was declared missing, presumed dead. The motel reopened. Room 12 was repainted. The desk replaced. The letter was sealed in an evidence box and forgotten. Almost. Chapter 8. 2008. 30 years later, technology did what patience never could. A private search group, investigating historical mining hazards, mapped the old shafts beneath Silver Lake. They found an air pocket. Inside it, 4 sets of remains, and one more, an adult male seated, back against the rock, hands folded. As if waiting nearby lay a leather briefcase and a flashlight. No batteries inside. The last detail. The flashlight was warm when they found it. No one could explain why. Epilogue. What Silver Falls keeps. Thomas Miller did not disappear into fog. He walked back into a memory he had been avoiding his entire life. The letter was not a prophecy. It was permission to stop running, to stop editing, to finally remember. Silver Falls still exists. The motel still stands. And if you drive north on Highway 26 late enough at night, there will come a moment when the radio fades into static. Not because there's nothing left to hear, but because some stories end where they began. Waiting. Chapter 9. The woman who reopened the file. In 2007, nearly 30 years after Thomas Miller vanished, a woman named Rachel Connors came across his name by accident. Rachel was 36. A freelance investigative journalist, based in Eugene, Oregon. She specialized in stories no one wanted anymore. Environmental negligence, forgotten court cases, quiet settlements buried under time. She was researching abandoned mining sites when she found a footnote. Silver Lake Ventilation Network. Hazard status: undetermined. Undetermined bothered her. It usually meant someone stopped asking questions. When Rachel filed a public records request, she received a thin envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a sheriff's report. Case status: closed. Subject: Miller, Thomas A. Location: the Whispering Pine Motel, Silver Falls. Cause: presumed suicide. Rachel noticed something immediately. There was no body. The first interview, Rachel drove to Silver Falls in early March. The motel clerk had changed, but the building hadn't. When she asked about room 12, the new owner hesitated, then said, "We don't rent that one in winter." Rachel asked why. He shrugged. "Plumbing issues." The answer was rehearsed. Eleanor Pike. Eleanor Pike was 87 when Rachel knocked on her door. She recognized the name Thomas Miller instantly. Didn't ask for clarification. Didn't ask why Rachel was there. She simply said, "I always wondered who would come back for him." Eleanor told Rachel about the breakfast. About the 2 cups. About the lipstick. She'd never put that detail in her statement, because no one had asked. Rachel asked about the letter. Eleanor went quiet. Then said, "That letter wasn't goodbye, it was instructions." Chapter 10. The Psychiatrist. Dr. Alan Whitmore had retired in 1986. By the time Rachel found him, he was living outside Salem, Oregon, in a house filled with books and medical journals from another era. He had treated Thomas Miller for 11 months, not for depression, for dissociative episodes. Whitmore agreed to speak on record with conditions. No sensationalism, no supernatural framing. This wasn't madness, he said. This was survival. The sessions. Thomas never spoke about the lake directly. He spoke about control, about the fear of missing something important, about the sensation that time could skip. He brought the letter up during their final session. Not the motel letter. An earlier version. Whitmore remembered it clearly. He asked me if a person could give themselves instructions they wouldn't remember writing. Whitmore told him yes, under certain conditions. Severe stress, sleep deprivation, unresolved trauma. Thomas nodded. Satisfied. The deadline, Rachel asked Whitmore about the date. November 14th. Whitmore closed his notebook. There wasn't a prediction, he said. That was containment. A fixed point, a moment the mind could prepare for. Thomas believed that if he reached the place where the trauma began physically, the dissociation would stop, not heal. Stop. Chapter 11. The letter, revisited. Rachel obtained a copy of the letter through a legal appeal. She read it aloud into a recorder. Slowly, line by line. If you're reading this, the fog has already reached the porch. A grounding statement. Confirmation that the process had begun. Do not look out the window. Visual hallucinations were a known trigger. You'll hear the engine. It isn't the car. Auditory anticipation. Preemptive reassurance. When they knock. Not visitors. Memory intrusion. Just go. Acceptance. Not death. Return. The thumbprint. Rachel sent the letter to a modern forensic lab. The ink composition dated back to the early 1970s, not 1978. Thomas had carried the letter with him for years, waiting. Chapter 12. What the police missed. Rachel compared missing persons reports from 1955 to 1980. She found 6, all men, all alone. All last seen near Silver Lake or Silver Falls. All labeled accidents. 3 had stayed at the Whispering Pine. All had rented rooms for one night. All had ordered breakfast. For 2, Sheriff Grady's files. Before his death, Grady left a sealed box. Inside was a handwritten note. We kept calling it closure. It was avoidance. Chapter 13. 2008. Expanded. When the remains were found, Rachel was there. She watched as they lifted Thomas Miller out of the shaft. His watch had stopped at 12:41 a.m., the same time as the camp clocks. The final inconsistency. The flashlight. No batteries, no wiring fault, no heat source. The technician wrote, "Residual warmth unexplained." Rachel did not include that line in her article. She didn't need to. Epilogue extended. What we do with the truth. Rachel published her investigation in a long-form piece. It went viral. Not because it was scary, because it was familiar. People recognized Thomas. In themselves, in the places they avoided, in the memories they edited. Silver Falls did not change. The motel still stands. Room 12 is still there, and the 4 is still. Presses close. Chapter 14. The others. Rachel Connors did not plan to write about anyone except Thomas Miller. That changed when she began lining the cases up side by side. She spread photocopies across her kitchen table. Different decades, different counties. Same pattern. The names were unremarkable. Howard Keene, 1968. Samuel Ortiz, 1972. Franklin Doyle, 1976. Daniel Price, 1959. All men between 38, all living alone. All described by neighbors as quiet, polite, kept to themselves. And all of them had one detail in common that never made it into the headlines. They had each spent at least one night at the Whispering Pine Motel. The breakfast ledger. The motel's old guest ledgers had survived by accident, stored in a damp cardboard box, forgotten in a maintenance shed, nearly thrown out during a renovation in the early 90s. Rachel photographed every page. There it was, again and again. One night stays, cash payments, room numbers varied, but in the margin, written in different hands, B2. 2 breakfasts. Always 2. Rato. Counted. Out of 27 one-night guests over 3 decades, 6 had ordered breakfast for 2. All 6 were dead. Patterns don't prove intent. Rachel knew the danger of pattern obsession. Correlation was not causation, but patterns were how stories began. She tracked down surviving relatives. Most didn't want to talk. One did. Samuel Ortiz's sister. Maria Ortiz still lived in Medford. Her brother Samuel had been reported missing in 1972 after a probable hiking accident. She never believed it. He hated hiking, she said. He hated the woods. Rachel asked about Silver Lake. Maria went still. He talked about it, she said. Not like a place, like a mistake. Samuel had been a machinist. He complained of headaches, of dreams where he was walking somewhere he didn't remember starting from. He said he felt like something was waiting for him to catch up. Chapter 15. The last night, reconstructed. Rachel reconstructed Thomas Miller's final night, minute by minute. Not from imagination. From data. 6:40 p.m. Check-in. Cash payment. Room 12. Thomas's signature was clean, no tremor. 6:58 p.m. Car door opens and closes. Rachel knew this because a truck driver staying in room 9 later mentioned hearing it while unloading equipment. No one else exits the vehicle. 7:02 p.m. phone call to the front desk. 2 breakfasts. Rachel noted the phrasing. Not exactly, not denial. Qualification. 7:31 p.m. Coffee machine turns on. The model, Mr. Coffeeus, RX-300, took approximately 6 minutes to brew. The cup found warm in the morning suggested it had been turned on again later. Someone, or something, was still following a routine. 8:03 p.m. television on CBS Evening News. Rachel obtained the broadcast transcript. One line stood out, a brief story about an abandoned mine collapse in eastern Oregon. Thomas watched less. 9:12 p.m. This was the gap. No witnesses, no sound reports, no data, Rachel marked it in red. 10:26 p.m. The motel phone log showed a brief connection attempt from room 12. It didn't go through. No dial tone registered. The handset was later found resting off the cradle, as if Thomas had picked it up and then changed his mind. Jumps a blast. 11:04 p.m. The coffee machine was turned on again. This mattered. Rachel confirmed it with an electrician. The heating plate cycle reset had been logged by the breaker. 2 cups. 2 people. Or 1 man. Preparing himself twice. 11:17 p.m. Power draw drops. Lights off. Television off. Heating unit silent. But the breaker shows something else. A brief spike. Lasting 7 minutes. Then nothing. 12:41 a.m. Rachel stared at the number for a long time. It appeared again on Thomas's watch. On the chem clocks, on the mine records from a methane pressure drop in 1965. 7 minutes. Chapter 16. Dr. Whitmore's unsent letter. After Rachel's article was published, she received a package, no return address. Inside was a letter. Not from Thomas, from Dr. Alan Whitmore. He had written it in 1981. Never sent it. I am increasingly concerned that Mr. Miller does not wish to recover. He speaks of resolution, not healing. There is a difference. Whitmore had recommended inpatient care. Thomas declined. He said he had something to finish. The final session expanded. Whitmore's notes were clinical, but one line was underlined. Patient believes physical proximity to original site will collapse dissociative barrier. Rachel read that sentence 3 times, then she understood. The motel wasn't a destination, it was a staging point. Chapter 17. Why the others followed. Rachel never claimed that Thomas led the others. There was no cult, no contact between them. But trauma has gravity. People orbit the places where it was formed. Silver Falls. Silver Lake. The motel was simply close enough. A place to stop. A place to decide. The one detail that didn't fit. Of the 6 men, 5 were found in the mine shafts. 1 was not. Franklin Doyle, 1976. His body was found miles away. In his pocket was a motel key. Room 12. The motel's records showed Doyle stayed in room 7. Rachel never resolved that. She didn't try to. Chapter 7. The psychiatrist who didn't close the file. Dr. Alan Whitmore never intended to become part of the story. In 1978, he was 46 years old, recently tenured at Oregon Health and Science University. A man who believed almost stubbornly in structure, diagnoses, and the quiet dignity of clinical distance. He specialized in trauma-related dissociative disorders long before the term became fashionable. Back when colleagues still called it an indulgent explanation for weak nerves. Thomas Miller was not his most severe patient. That, Whitmore would later admit, was precisely why he stayed with him. Their sessions began in May of 1978. 6 months before the motel. 6 months before the room went quiet. Thomas arrived early to every appointment. He sat in the same chair. He folded his coat the same way. He spoke calmly, carefully, like a man stepping through a minefield he had memorized by heart. He did not come complaining of hallucinations. He did not claim voices, visions, or paranoia. What he said instead was this: "I'm afraid I'm remembering things in the wrong order." Whitmore noted it, underlined it once, and asked him to explain. Thomas described moments where the present felt rehearsed, where sounds arrived before their causes, where he would write sentences and feel certain he had already read them somewhere years ago. In his own handwriting, he was not confused. He was organized. That worried Whitmore more than any delusion could have. Session transcript, June 3, 1978, recovered from personal files, released posthumously. Whitmore: have you ever experienced dissociation before? Miller: yes, but not like this. Whitmore: how is this different? Miller: before, it was like leaving a room. Now it feels like the room is waiting for me. Silence. 14 seconds. Whitmore. Waiting where? Miller. In places I haven't been yet. Whitmore attempted grounding techniques, temporal anchoring, journaling. That was his first mistake. Thomas did not journal feelings. He documented events, times, weather, smells. The exact tone of fluorescent lights, he wrote as if preparing evidence, not therapy. By July, Whitmore noticed something else. Thomas had begun writing letters. Not sending them, just writing them. He never brought the letters to session, but he referenced them often, with a strange mixture of comfort and dread. They help me remember what order I'm supposed to do things in. Whitmore asked the obvious question. Who are they for? Thomas hesitated, then smiled apologetically. For me, when I get there. Chapter 8. Rachel Connors and the Problem of Coincidences. Rachel Connors first read Whitmore's notes in November of 2007. She was working out of Seattle, known for stories that refused neat endings. She had not been looking for Thomas Miller. She had been researching a broader piece, unexplained adult disappearances in the Pacific Northwest between 1950 and 1985. The pattern had been statistical at first. Men, ages 35 to 50. Stable employment, no criminal record, no financial motive, no signs of struggle, and always something unfinished. A breakfast left out, a car with fuel, a motel room paid for in advance. Thomas Miller was one name among what changed everything was the letter. Rachel didn't find it in police evidence. She found it referenced briefly in an internal memo from the county sheriff's office, dated March 1979. Psychiatric relevance. Pending. Letter contents deemed non-actionable. Non-actionable was journalist shorthand for too uncomfortable to categorize. She filed a public records request. 2 weeks later, she received a thin envelope. Inside, photocopies. Poor quality. Corners cut off, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Not frantic, not sloppy. Prepared. Rachel noticed the first inconsistency immediately. The paper stock of the letter did not match the motel stationery. It was older. Mid-60s. By texture alone. She sent a copy to an independent document examiner. The report came back 3 days later. Estimated paper manufacture, 1964 to 1967. Rachel read that line 3 times. Then she turned the page. At the bottom of the letter, barely visible in the photocopy, was a faint indentation. An impression as if the paper had once rested atop another page. She adjusted the contrast. There were words beneath the words. A partial sentence. If I hesitate, remind me why we agreed this was necessary. Rachel Connors leaned back in her chair and realized something important. This was not a disappearance. This was a plan. Chapter 9. The first visit to Silver Falls. Rachel drove to Silver Falls in February. T-Town not in T changed much. That, she would later write, was its most unsettling feature. The Whispering Pine Motel still stood at the edge of the forest, renamed Whisper Pines Lodge. Vinyl siding slapped over rot like a bandage over bone. Room 12 still existed. The manager, a man in his late 60s, named Howard Bell, remembered the story. Everyone did, but Howard remembered something else. He asked me if the room had a window that faced the trees, Howard said. Not the parking lot. The trees. Rachel asked why that mattered. Howard shrugged, said he didn't want to see the road, said it made it harder to listen. That night, Rachel stayed in room 12. She lay awake, listening, and sometime after 2 a.m., she heard it. Not a voice, not footsteps. A low, rhythmic sound, like water moving through stone. Rachel sat up in bed. She remembered a line from the letter. If you hear it before dawn, that means the ground is still open. She did not sleep again. Chapter 10. What Whitmore never published. Dr. Alan Whitmore died in 1999. But before he did, he wrote a paper he never submitted. It had no title, only a note on the cover regarding patients who mistake resolution for recovery. In it, Whitmore proposed a theory that would have ended his career, that certain traumatic memories do not fade or fragment but wait. That, under the right conditions, location, sensory input, temporal cues, the mind does not relive trauma. It returns to it. And sometimes, he wrote, the patient does not want to come back. The final paragraph was about Thomas. Whitmore described the last session they had, 1 week before the motel. Thomas had seemed calmer than ever, at peace. As he stood to leave, he said one last thing. I think I know where it ends now. That makes it easier to start. Whitmore never saw him again, but he never closed the file. Chapter 11. The second letter was never meant to be found. Rachel Connors did not find the second letter in an archive. She found it by accident. In the spring of 2008, she interviewed Margaret Lewis, Thomas Miller's former neighbor in Portland. The interview was meant to be routine background color, a sense of the man outside the mystery. Margaret was 72, sharp, methodical. She kept everything: photographs, utility bills, returned mail. Halfway through the interview, Rachel mentioned the motel. Margaret paused. That wasn't his first letter, she said. Rachel stopped writing. What letter? She asked carefully. Margaret stood up, disappeared into the hallway, and returned with a small shoebox. Inside were letters Thomas had written to himself. Unsent, unopened, Margaret explained. He asked me to hold on to them. Said if he ever stopped by suddenly and asked for them back, I was supposed to refuse. Said it was important I didn't give them to him. Rachel felt something cold settle in her chest. Did he explain why? Margaret nodded. He said, because if I ask for them, that won't be me asking. There were 4 letters in the box. Rachel only read one that day. The envelope was marked, "If you've already heard the water." Inside, the handwriting was the same as the motelletter.com/precise. This is the part where you will want to rush. Don't. If you are reading this, it means you believe you are running out of time. You are not. Time is not the problem. The problem is location. You will think the motel is the place. It is not. The motel is only where you remember what you promised. You promised not to look away again. Rachel stopped. She realized something crucial. Thomas was not writing from the future. He was writing for a future version of himself he no longer trusted. Chapter 12. Whitmore's margin notes. Rachel tracked down Whitmore's remaining files through his daughter. Most of the material was clinical, dry, detached, but in the margins, handwritten in pencil, Whitmore had left notes he never intended anyone to read. Next to one entry, dated August 12, 1978, Whitmore had written, "Patient demonstrates advanced anticipatory coping, not delusional, possibly rehearsing self-directed exposure." And beneath it, smaller, dangerous, if unsupervised. In another margin, letters function as externalized executive control. Rachel translated it the way a journalist does. The letters weren't madness. They were guardrails. Without them, Thomas would panic. With them, he could move forward, towards something. Whitmore's final margin note chilled her. Patient believes return is ethically required. Not healing, not closure. Required. Chapter 13. The third letter, never read. The third letter was marked differently. No instructions, no conditions, just a name. For the boys, Rachel did not read it, not yet. Because by then, she understood something the investigators never had. Thomas Miller didn't go to the motel to disappear. He went there to make sure he wouldn't turn back. Chapter 14. Silver Lake, August 12, 1965. The lake was perfectly still, not still. As if something had pressed pause on the surface of the world. The boys had been asleep for hours. Cabin 3 sat closest to the water, its windows open to let in the August air. Inside, 4 sleeping bags lay in a neat row. shoes lined against the wall, flashlights on a shelf, a transistor, radio, turned off. Mid-song, Thomas Miller was awake. He lay on his back, staring at the wooden beams above him, listening to the sound that had pulled him out of sleep. Not shouting, not footsteps, a low vibration, like a distant engine running underwater. He sat up. Outside, the forest had changed. The insects were silent. Every one of them. Thomas stepped onto the dirt path barefoot. The ground felt wrong, cooler than it should have been, faintly damp, as if the earth itself were sweating. That was when the light appeared. Not above. Below. The lake did not reflect the sky. It had become clear. So clear that Thomas could see straight through the water and into something else entirely. Lights, streets, movement. A city, inverted beneath the surface, glowing with a slow, pulsing violet hue. The air smelled sharp, metallic. Behind him, one of the boys whispered his name. Thomas Tornet. They were standing at the edge of the water now, all four of them, awake but not frightened, drawn forward like sleepwalkers. The lake made a sound then, a deep, hollow exhale, and from somewhere beneath the surface, something answered. Thomas Frosse. He felt it then, and there the moment where choice still existed. He could scream. He could run. He could wake the counselors, or he could do what his body was already doing. Nothing. The ground near the shoreline gave way with a sound like tearing cloth. The boys vanished. No splash. Just gone. Thomas screamed then. But the forest swallowed it whole. Chapter 15. What the reports didn't say, the official report would later state. No signs of struggle. No witnesses, possible sleepwalking, assumed drowning. But Thomas remembered details that never made it onto paper. The heat returning too quickly, the insects resuming their noise all at once, the lake surface sealing itself like glass, and the sound. The sound followed him for years, in pipes, in bathtubs, in rain hitting metal roofs, water moving through stone. Chapter 16. Why, he never went back until he did. Thomas never returned to Silver Lake as a child, not because he was afraid, because he understood something instinctively, even at 10 years old. The place wasn't dangerous. He had learned how easy it was to stand still, how natural it felt, and he was terrified that if he went back too soon, he wouldn't move again. Chapter 17. Rachel reads the third letter. Rachel Connors read the third letter in her hotel room. She waited until morning. Sunlight, coffee, anything to anchor herself. The letter was short. I remember the exact second I decided to stay alive. It was not brave. It was not kind. I tell myself now that I was a child, that I had no choice. But children make choices every day. If you find this, Andy, I'm gone. Please do not call it disappearance. Call it completion. Rachel folded the letter once. 10. Again. She knew where she had to go next, the day before anything went wrong. Silver Lake Summer Camp, August 12, 1965. Did not feel dangerous. That morning began like every other. The flag was raised at exactly 8 a.m. Bacon burned slightly in the mess hall. Someone spilled orange juice near cabin 3 and never wiped it up properly. Thomas Miller remembered these things clearly, not because they mattered, but because they were normal. Normal was what made everything else impossible to explain. He was 10 years old. Thin. Quiet. A boy who listened more than he spoke. The counselors liked him because he followed instructions without asking questions. The other boys tolerated him because he never told on anyone. Cabin 3 housed 5 boys. 4 of them would not make it home. That afternoon, the lake was closed for swimming. One of the counselors, David Reynolds, age 22 later, testified that the water looked wrong. Like oil, he said, too smooth. The official report dismissed this as imagination. Thomas watched from the shore as the counselors argued quietly. He remembered the way their voices dropped when they thought the boys weren't listening. He remembered the smell. A shop, Sour note under the pine and sun-warmed dirt. No one mentioned it. Chapter 19. Statement of David Reynolds excerpt. Recorded August 18, 1965. At approximately 11:40 p.m., I observed an unusual glow over the lake. Purple, not lightning. No thunder. I assumed at first it was atmospheric. When I returned with a flashlight, the light was gone. Cabin 3 was empty. Reynolds insisted the boys must have slept. He repeated that word often. Sleepwalked. It was easier than saying he didn't hear them leave. Easier than admitting he didn't check the shoreline sooner. He resigned 2 weeks later, moved to Nevada. Never worked with children again. What Thomas didn't tell them. Thomas was interviewed 3 times. Each time, an adult sat across from him with a notebook and a voice that tried too hard to sound calm. They asked him what he saw. He told them what he was allowed to remember, that the boys were gone, that the water was still, that he had been asleep. He did not tell them about the lights. He did not tell them about the sound, and he did not tell them about the moment brief. Sharp, unforgettable when one of the boys looked back at him. Not afraid. Confused. As if asking a question Thomas didn't know how to answer. The first time, the memory broke through. It happened years later. Thomas was 27, living in Portland, working his first teaching job. He had been standing in his kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil. When the pipes rattled, the sound cut straight through him. Not loud. Precise. The same vibration he had felt at the lake. He dropped the kettle, sat on the floor, and for the first time since 1965, the memory arrived out of sequence. Not images. Sensations. Cold ground. Metal beneath soil. Air moving where it shouldn't. He didn't understand it then, but he began to write it down. Rachel finds the pattern. Rachel Connors noticed something the police never did. Every man connected to the Silver Lake disappearances witnesses, staff, Volanius had left town within 5 years. Except one, Thomas Miller. He stayed. He taught history. He archived other people's pasts, while quietly excavating his own. Rachel wrote in her notebook. He didn't run. He waited. The letter, that wasn't a letter, the 4th document, wasn't addressed. No envelope. No greeting. Just a page. Folded and refolded until the creases nearly tore through. Rachel found it tucked inside Whitmore's unpublished manuscript. It read, "Do not mistake guilt for responsibility. Responsibility implies choice. You did not choose the light. You chose not to turn away." Rachel closed her eyes. She understood now. Thomas wasn't trying to forgive himself. He was trying to finish something he never completed. November 9th, 1978, the week before. Thomas Miller began the week the way he always did. Monday morning, 6:10 a.m. Same diner. Same booth. Same waitress. He ordered black coffee and eggs over easy. He unfolded the newspaper, but didn't read it. Instead, he watched the condensation slide down the window in thin, uneven lines. The sound of rain followed him everywhere now. Not loud enough to notice consciously. Not quiet enough to ignore. At school, his students noticed something was different. Not dramatic. Not alarming. Just absence. One student later told Rachel Connors. It felt like he was already gone, like we were listening to someone explain something he'd already finished thinking about. That week, Thomas canceled his psychiatry appointment. Whitmore noted it, with a small question mark in the margin. Whitmore's last attempt. Dr. Whitmore called Thomas on November 10th. The phone rang 7 times. Thomas picked up on the 8th. Their conversation was not recorded, but Whitmore summarized it afterward. Patient reports clarity, expresses relief, denies suicidal ideation, acknowledges return language, concern remains high. Whitmore asked him directly, "Are you planning to hurt yourself?" Thomas Poussed then said, "No, I'm planning to stop avoiding something." Whitmore suggested hospitalization. Thomas declined politely. "That would defeat the point," he said. The drive south. Thomas left Portland on November 12th. He packed lightly. One suitcase, a leather satchel, a flashlight, several folded papers. The rain thickened as he drove. By the time he turned off Highway 26, the radio was nothing but static. He did not adjust it. He needed the noise. At 4:37 p.m., he passed the sign, "Welcome to Silver Falls. Population 2,814. Rachel Conness would later discover that the population count had not changed since 1972. The Whispering Pine Motel. The motel smelled like damp carpet and pine cleaner. The clerk, a woman in her early 20s, remembered Thomas clearly. He was very polite, didn't flirt, didn't complain, asked what time breakfast started. Room 12. Always room 12. Thomas requested a room facing the trees. He unpacked slowly Ungi's coat, set the alarm clock, placed the letters on the desk. He brewed coffee, left one cup untouched. The motel letter context restored. Rochelle Connors reread the motel letter after everything else. This time, she noticed what she had missed before. The letter wasn't written to Thomas. It was written around panic. Each sentence functioned like a barrier. Do not look out the window. Visual trigger avoidance. You will hear the engine. Predicted auditory hallucination. Do not ask who is there. Interruption of compulsive behavior. This wasn't prophecy. It was prevention. Thomas had written himself a script so he wouldn't improvise when fear arrived. November 13th, 1978, night. The rain intensified after midnight. Room 12 shook slightly with the wind. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed. He checked his watch repeatedly, not because he was nervous, because he was waiting for alignment. At 1:42 a.m., he heard it. The sound. Water moving through rock. He closed his eyes, opened the letter, read the line he had underlined years ago. If you hesitate, remember why we agreed this was necessary. Morning without him. Sheriff Grady entered room 12 at 8:15 a.m. Everything was in place. No struggle, no broken glass, no footprints in the mud outside the window, just absence. The breakfast tray sat untouched. The alarm clock was still ticking. Grady noticed the smell of coffee fresh, impossibly Rachel at the lake present day. Rachel stood at Silver Lake in 2008. The water was calm. Too calm. She heard it then. The same low vibration Thomas had described, not imagined. Recorded. Her audio equipment picked it up, the sound moving beneath the ground. The old shafts. The mining records were clear. Beneath Silver Lake ran a network of ventilation shafts from abandoned operations shut down in the 1940s. Poorly sealed, poorly mapped. In 1965, several collapses were reported. Unrelated incidents dismissed. Rachel stared at the entrance marked on the map. She finally understood. Thomas didn't return to die. He returned to stand where he hadn't. Completion. The search team found him in 2009, deep underground, in a pocket of air, seated, back against stone. Flashlight beside him. Empty. No sign of panic. In his satchel, one final letter. Rachel read it last. I stayed still once. I will not do that again. What they wrote after they found him. The official report was 7 pages long. Cause of death, undetermined. No signs of struggle. No evidence of third-party involvement. The phrase appeared 3 times. Voluntary descent. Rachel Connors circled it with a pen. Voluntary did not mean willing. It meant unopposed. The search team had found no rope. No note at the site. No panic indicators. Thomas had navigated the old shafts calmly, deliberately. He had followed routes that no casual explorer would have known. Routes he had memorized. The 5th letter, the final letter, was folded differently. Not creased, pressed flat, as if meant to be read once and never handled again. Rachel waited until she was alone. If you are reading this, It means I reached the place without stopping. That matters. I need you to understand something the reports will not say. I did not go back because I wanted to disappear. I went back because something was still waiting for me to finish looking at it. Rachel felt a familiar discomfort. This wasn't confession. It was testimony. People will say, trauma distorts memory. What they don't say is that memory also distorts time. Some moments do not stay where they happen. They follow. Rachel's editor doesn't run the story. The piece never ran. Not in full. Rachel's editor read the draft twice, then said, "It's not that I don't believe you. It's that this doesn't end where people expect it to." Rachel understood. There was no villain, no warning, no neat moral. Just a man who returned to a moment everyone else had moved past. She published a shorter version. The rest stayed with her. The sound. Months later, Rachel stood in her apartment kitchen. The pipes rattled. Just once. She froze, not afraid. Attentive. She remembered a line she hadn't included in the article. The sound doesn't mean danger. It means proximity. The pipes went quiet. Rachel exhaled. What completion really meant. Thomas Miller did not solve the past. He did not redeem himself. He did not save anyone. He did something smaller and harder. He returned to the exact place where he learned what it meant to do nothing, and he did not do that again. Epilogue. Silver Lake. The lake remains, still unchanged. On certain mornings, the surface looks too smooth, too clear. If you stand there long enough, you can hear something beneath it. Not a voice, not a warning, just water moving through stone. Some stories are not meant to scare us away. They are meant to remind us that unfinished moments do not fade. They wait. Addendum. The letters that were never logged. There were 4 letters officially cataloged. Rachel knew this. She also knew that the hospital archive log had been edited twice, not rewritten. Adjusted. The timestamps didn't match the intake records. She noticed it 3 weeks after the article went live while reviewing unrelated material for a different story. That's how these things usually happen, not during obsession. During distraction. Letter 0. The envelope was marked personal effects duplicate. That alone was wrong. There should not have been duplicates. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no date. Typed. This is not the first time I am writing this. Rachel read it twice before continuing. If you are reading this version, then the others failed to explain the most important part. What I am describing is not a memory problem. It is a placement problem. Dr. Thomas Miller, psychiatrist. Thomas had not specialized in trauma. That was the assumption everyone made. In reality, his early work focused on perceptual continuity the way the brain maintains a sense of now. His unpublished notes, later recovered from a private storage unit, showed patterns, repeated phrases, underlined sentences. The present is not stable. It is maintained. One margin note appeared over and over. Failure to intervene creates residual presence. The night at Silver Lake expanded. Thomas had written about the night again, not emotionally. Clinically, I did not freeze because I was afraid. I froze because my perception narrowed. He described the moment in anatomical terms. Loss of peripheral sound. Compression of time. A sensation of watching a completed event before it ended. I was observing myself too late. This was not dissociation. This was something else. Rachel interviews a neurologist. The neurologist did not want to go on record, but he spoke freely. There's a fringe theory, he said, not popular, not funded. It suggests that unresolved inaction can create persistent predictive loops. Rachel asked him to explain. He sighed. Imagine your brain flags a moment as critical, but you don't act. The brain doesn't close the file. He paused. So it keeps checking. Why, Thomas went back. The mind was not symbolic. That mattered. Thomas chose a place with restricted exits, known acoustic anomalies, documented disorientation effects. He wanted to recreate the conditions. I need to see whether the loop requires context or location. This was not suicide planning. This was experimentation. The second Tylist letter, unsent, found in his laptop drafts, never printed. I am no longer afraid of the moment. I am afraid of leaving it unattended. Rachel stopped reading there, then continued. If I return and remain present through the entire duration, if I do not look away, then the moment should complete. The official conclusion versus the quiet one. The authorities closed the case. Rachel didn't reopen it. She didn't need to. She understood something the reports couldn't include. Thomas didn't die trying to escape the past. He died trying to finish witnessing it. Rachel's problem. After finishing the last letter, Rachel noticed a change. Small, annoying moments felt. Delayed, not memory. Timing. She would reach for a glass and feel her hand hesitate just long enough to notice. She remembered a line she hadn't quoted. Loops propagate through observation. Final. Addendum. What this story is actually about. This is not a story about guilt, or trauma, or death. It is about attention, about what happens when a moment asks something of a sound we refuse to answer. Most moments dissolve. Some do not. Some wait. You don't need to go back to be haunted. Sometimes all you have to do is fail to stay. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like it, and listen to other stories on this channel. We're working hard for you and are constantly improving our content for your convenience. If you have any ideas or suggestions, please share them in the comments.